consulting company. She will just do a feasibility study for us today. And then tomorrow we're going to go back to our examples and do all the examples that I've asked you guys to do last week. Okay? So if we today, we could just give her a chance to show us how they do feasibility studies in the industry. Her background is in quantity surveying. She's worked for different companies. I think maybe you would be better placed to introduce yourself properly and then we can begin. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. It's always so nice to be back at university because education is one of the things I'm very passionate about. So as she has already introduced me, my name is Tryfina Kgokong. My details are on the board if you need to get in touch with me. I am the founder and the CEO of Triumphant Zoe. It is predominantly a property company focusing on quantity surveying services, full scope. And I'm also passionate about coaching, and so coaching is our other division where we offer you mentorship and personal development, leadership development, and making sure that people are the best versions of themselves, basically. So my email address is tryfina@triumphantzoe.com, and our website is triumphantzoe.com. And yes, social media, you can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, @triumphantzoe. All right. So I've got a nice quote to get us started with. It is by Les Brown. It says, "You are the only real obstacle in your path to a fulfilling life." And so if you've ever wondered why you're not where you are today, you have to look at yourself, okay? That's just a little motivation to get us started. So today we're going to talk about feasibilities. And a little introduction, my background. As I've already mentioned, I'm a founder and CEO of Triumphant Zoe Property and Coaching. I studied a Bachelor of Science in Construction Studies at the University of Cape Town, which I completed in 2005, and an honors in quantity surveying, same university, and also went further and did a master's in business administration at Stellenbosch Business School, and continued, property development program because I'm passionate about property development, and also did life and business coaching as well as your neuro-linguistic programming. And I'm registered with your COMENSA as well as ICR, which are the governing bodies of your coaching and mentors. And I'm also registered with your Council of the South African Profession, as well as the Royal Institute of the Chartered Surveyors as a professional quantity surveyor. I've been working for 12 years full-time in the industry since 2007, and half of that time I spent with MLC Quantity Surveyors. Started off my career in Cape Town, and then moved over to their Dubai office as well for some time. Alrighty, now in terms of the agenda of the items we're going to discuss today, I don't know how much time we have.
About an hour and a half.
An hour and a half, okay, good. That's enough time for us. Okay, so we're gonna obviously have to start with what is a feasibility study and when do you actually need it, as well as what is the purpose. Please let's try and make this as interactive as possible. I don't want to just be the only person speaking, so I will be asking questions as we move around, and please feel free to speak your mind. Every contribution matters. There's no stupid question, okay? And also there's no stupid comment. So we'll talk about some of the considerations we need to look at when we do a feasibility study, and also we have to obviously look at the scope of what the feasibility study has to incorporate and the methodology that we use. When you do your research, you always have a methodology chapter of how are you actually going to carry out your feasibility. Then we will look at structuring a financial feasibility and evaluating your potential for actually having a development from that feasibility. Then you obviously have to estimate what are these development costs that you need to incorporate into your feasibility. You have to have a look at what is the return that you'll be getting from this development, and you must have a motivation for your feasibility study, and look at some of the variables that you have to consider when you're doing your feasibility. Then we will do a little example quickly, and then we'll then move into looking at how we can optimize the feasibility study and some of the practical solutions and some questions and answers and highlights at the end. Alrighty. Now we need to obviously put into practice whatever we're learning. So let's not just learn to accumulate the knowledge and not practice it, okay? Just some ideas to think about. Alrighty, what is a feasibility study? Before I even open that slide, can I get some ideas from everyone of what exactly is a feasibility study? Yes?
Isn't it to see if it is worth investing into?
Exactly, yes. You have to see, is it worth the investment that we're going to make? And what other suggestions do you have? Yes?
If someone has an idea about what you use to put a property to, deciding is it viable for that?
Exactly, yes. The viability of the idea, yes. Is it relevant? Are we able to actually implement this idea? Or is it just a dream that we have, right? Yes? What else? There's a lot of reasons why we have a feasibility study. What is a feasibility study? Yes?
You basically look at whether market conditions are suitable for a type of development.
Exactly. Yes, you have to do your research. Look at the market, look at the current environment, the economies, and what else? Okay, let's move on. So yes, you want to assess what are the current opportunities, and you want to also identify the risks involved before you can carry out the project. So you want to see, is this project feasible or not? That's why you do a feasibility, right? And also, you want to estimate what are the actual projected costs, what are the revenues, and also what are the profits, based on those costs and revenues. And then you also want to benchmark against other criteria in the industry. That's why you do a feasibility. That's what is feasibility. And then also, the purpose of the feasibility study. The main objective of the feasibility study is to actually ensure that this project can be done legally and it's technically viable. Someone mentioned viability. And also, economically must be justifiable. We have to look at your socio-economic issues as well as your financial issues. We can't just focus on the returns alone, right? And actually, someone mentioned it. Is it worth the investment that we're going to make? Because if you're going to take investors' funds and put it into a development, you cannot afford to lose people's money. And can we actually afford this project before we can even start thinking about it? Can we afford it, looking at the cost that we're going to incur on the project? That's the purpose of doing a feasibility. Now, some of the general considerations when you want to do a feasibility, you have to use costs and rates that are not too loose, right? You have to make sure that the rates are similar to other development schemes and apply them to your particular development and make sure that you analyze them correctly. And so you have to take care when you're using this approach of using rates and comparing them with the market rates. And there can be a number of variables as well. You have to be aware of the errors which may arise from using similar projects, because that's what we do as quantity surveyors. We take previous projects, historical information, we implement that to the current project that we are trying to do, but we also have to assess the risks involved in doing that because things change along the way, okay? You have to look at the time in the program that you have set aside to do this project and see if you can actually wait 2 years to actually implement this project and what are the kind of changes that are going to be happening. Your price doesn't stay the same, so you have to allow for your escalation and all those things. And you have to also look at your sensitivity analysis of using alternative assumptions. So undertake this to demonstrate the results that would flow from using alternative assumptions for that particular variable. Okay. Now, in terms of your project plans, you are trying to deliver a project without a project plan. Well, you know that you're going to have a problem. Because it's like trying to play a football game without a game plan. So it's very important that your project management comes into play. It's very important that you've got your design ideas as well as you're looking into your feasibility. Okay? You must have a game plan. If you don't have a plan, someone said if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. That's what it is. Now, we have to also agree on the scope of the feasibility study, right? Otherwise, we'll just be shooting in the air and hoping that we hit the target, right? And so it's very important that the client's requirements are taken into consideration, right? And we need to then understand what is the brief of the client, and also in terms of the feasibility study, what exactly is the scope that we need to allow for as we carry out this study, and how big is this development, what kind of a development is it mixed use, is it residential, all that scope we need to make sure we understand, as well as the services that are going to be required in this particular development, looking at your professional team and all the other operational costs that are involved when you're putting together a feasibility study. You must obviously have some concept plans. You know, the concept plans of your proposed development that gives us kind of like a master plan of what are the boundaries that we're going to be doing this feasibility study on. Let's say, for instance, we've got an area of 7,000 square meters. At least we know we're working around a land that's 7,000 square meters, something like that. And also, we need to allow for any changes that may take place in the scope of the development. So we can make some assumptions or have some contingency as well. All right, now when it comes to our methodology of how do we actually do this, this feasibility, we have to have a preparation and collection of information process where we know where is the site, first of all, because we know with property, your location is very important. It brings in a lot of factors there. You have to know where is the site. Is it a green field? Is it a brown field? You know the difference between the two. Greenfield is a site that has not been touched at all, has nothing on it. Brownfield is a site that has been previously developed and so forth. So we need to understand what are the ground conditions on this site and what is the accessibility onto the site. Can we go on the site and actually have access? Because we know some of the sites that are not greenfield sites, maybe they are occupied by some people illegally. All these things we have to take into consideration when we do feasibility. Your ground conditions, you might have rock under the ground. You need to do your geotechnical surveys to check that condition of that land. Is it a plain site? Is it a site that is on level? All those considerations. And of course, you have to look at your third-party interests, your servitudes. Is it a restricted access area? Because if there's no services that are connecting that site to the rest of the other developments, then you're going to spend a lot of money trying to put in roads there, your water, your electricity connections. All these servitudes are very important when you're looking at your feasibility. And then as well as policies. There are governmental regulations when it comes to development, so you have to look at your zoning rights, depending on the type of development that you want to do. And you also have to look at your environmental restrictions. Some places are heritage sites, so you have to take into consideration all those restrictions. As well as the program, your pre-contract and your contract escalation comes into play there, because we know that prices will stay the same with the inflation fluctuations, okay? Now, let's say that we are evaluating a potential development, and we have to make sure that we have an optimum balance between the market and the development potential. So this is in order to evaluate the developmental options that we have to consider the market. Someone said market earlier, right? And also we have to look at the physical and the potential of the site. Is there a demand for this kind of a development that we're thinking of doing? So we have to carry out our market research and look at the trends in the particular market that we're looking at. And we obviously have to also determine the optimum balance to maximize the return. So you want to make sure when you pick a site, whatever type of development you're going to be applying there is going to be the best use of that particular location. What is the demand in that location? Is there a demand for student accommodation, or is there a demand for residential apartments, or is there a demand for retail? So you have to be very clear about the market analysis that you're doing there. And so the demand and the market analysis, which I've just mentioned now, must be for the occupier's demand, because you can't develop something that doesn't have demand for in the industry. You're just wasting your investment, basically. All right. Okay. Now, when we look at the structuring of a financial feasibility, there are components involving your capital costs, and there are other components that involve your operational costs. So when you're looking at your capital costs, you want to consider the cost of the land, and when you're looking at the land cost, you have to make sure that you are checking out your transfer costs, your soil test costs, your zoning, your acquisition fees, back services, all the charges, tax, and all those improvements, land improvements, okay? Then you look at your escalated construction costs. As we mentioned, your timeline impacts the cost as well because of the price fluctuations and inflation. And so you will look at your builder's works, your site works, your preliminaries, contingencies, and your pre and your post-contract escalation. We'll go into your escalated construction costs. And then you've got your professional fees. You've got your quantity surveyors, you've got your architects, and we have a gazetted fee scale that we follow, obviously, that we apply depending on the cost of the project. There are also disbursements that you need to take into consideration for your traveling and your accommodations. It's not cheap being a developer, right? It's not cheap. And then we have to look at your finance costs. Where are you going to get the money from? Because money is not free. So there is your mortgage registration costs, you've got your finance raising costs, you've got your interest, you've got all sorts of finance costs. And just to continue on that, the capital costs, you've got your marketing costs. So you have to market that development. So you have to incorporate those costs in your feasibility study. And you've also got other costs, your sundry costs. Those are your legal costs. You need lawyers to come in, look at the contracts. You need your plan scrutiny fee. You've got your tenant coordination fees, depending on the type of development you're doing. All these lease agreements and rentable requirements and your all sorts of incomes that you get. All right. Now, when it comes to this is just for your capital costs, right, to develop this project. But then once you've developed this project, you now have to operate it as well. So you've also got your operational costs. And those will include your local authority charges, your management and your rent collection charges, your cleaning and maintenance, your sinking funds, and as well as other costs, including marketing during the operation of that particular development. Okay. Now, when you're looking at calculating your return on investment, I'm going to ask this question now. How do you calculate your return on your investment? ROI? How do you get it calculated? Can someone tell us?
I know how to calculate.
Exactly, yes. So it's your net operating income divided by your capital expenditure. Correct, exactly. So you look at your net income, which is calculated from taking your gross income minus your operating costs, and then you take that net income and you divide it by your capital expenditure. That's how you get your return on investment, okay? And so how do you allow for when you're doing your development costs? Some of these are actually estimated costs because this is a feasibility that, it's not an actual project. You're just wanting to see, is it feasible or not? So you will use kind of historical information to try and figure out this, but you also can go into the market and get the current quotations from the different service providers. And so we've already discussed all of these that you need to look into. Okay, now the measures of return, we've already spoken about the return on investment. So the success of a development is measured by the extent to which the investor's objectives are met. So let's remember, it's not always just about your money return. You must look at what other objectives did the client have that this development is going to meet. So the client wants to develop a school. If you have a school with a certain number of classrooms, you've met the objective of the client and you've got the demand from the students who are going to be attending that school. So it's a holistic approach when you're looking at feasibilities. Yes, the return on investment is very important. However, you also look at these other success measures. And so these objectives may be in terms of your yield, your inflation, the services and the public need, which I've just mentioned, etc., etc. Now, the decision making by the developer leads to one of the 3 course of actions. You either proceed with the development, or you terminate the process, or you go back to the pre-feasibility investigations and redefine the parameters if it's not working out to the way that you want it to work out. Okay? Now, in terms of your financial yield, it can be measured in a number of ways. We've mentioned, that return on investment is one of the measures of your financial yield, and then you can work it out also looking at your payback method. You can also look at your net present value as well as your internal return on investment, your rate of return. Okay. Now, this is blank. Anyways, it's not that important. Why do you have, perhaps you can answer us for this one.
With the previous thing, is there a preferred method, or do you usually do them all?
You can compare the different methods. It depends on your objective again as a client. Are you just looking to get the highest return on investment, or do you want to, you have a certain number of period that you want this project to pay you back by? Do you have a time limit, 10 years, 50 years? So it depends. Yeah. Okay? So then why should you have a feasibility study then? Yes?
It's sort of like you said earlier, a game plan for how you're going to undertake your development.
Exactly. Yes, you need to have a game plan. Some of the other reasons, it may not be 100% perfect, but it's actually better to have something than to have nothing, like you said. Have a game plan, have a plan, have a vision, where you're going, right? And also to benchmark. You want to compare what are the existing developments, what is this development we want to do, is it comparable with we benchmark it, right? Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. There we go. They're about managing, not eliminating the risk. The risk will always be there. Again, we said it narrows the risks, yes, and you need a game plan, yes, to make those decisions. And you consider all the other drivers and for benchmarking as well. Alrighty. Now, viability in the form of a feasibility study. Before instructing a feasibility study, the property professional should take a high-level view on the outputs that are required, particularly given the characteristics of the development. Am I going too fast for everyone? Or is it okay? Because I know I talk very fast. Okay, some of the examples. We have to look at what are the tenure definitions that are covered in that proposed development. Are these sold, or are they let, or is it a combination of both? So when you're doing your feasibility, you must look at those kind of considerations. And also, what are the type of assets that we are going to be looking at developing? You have different types of assets. You've got residential, you've got your commercial, and so forth. And so you need to look at how is the commercial performing compared to your residential assets. And then you look also at the period which the performance criteria are addressing, and if the work is developed in different stages. Some developers prefer to have different phases of development, and obviously that will affect your period and your timelines and your programs. So you have to perhaps that we can omit from this feasibility. You have to consider those things as you carry out a feasibility study. Maybe you don't want to really do public sector buildings, you want to focus more on the private sector. So you need to identify what are these omissions and any exclusions that you can identify, that you have to always, when you do your feasibility, you have to have your descriptions of what is this feasibility based on. So this is where you will mention your exclusions so that whoever is looking at your feasibility can understand the basis of your feasibility, right? And so, given the process of other factors in the development process, how detailed do you really need this feasibility to be? Do you want to spend like so many months working on a feasibility, or do you want to maybe squeeze it in a shorter period of time? And obviously, you know, time and quality relationship, the less time you have, the better the quality is, right? So if you only have 2 weeks to do a feasibility, you don't have as much time to gather all the information that you need to make sure that it is as detailed as possible. So these are the kind of things you want to look at, and how advanced is this design that you have. Perhaps you only have a sketch, It's still the initial stages. You haven't really given the instruction to the professional team to actually really carry on with the works. So you really just you don't want to do a lot of work and then do a feasibility and find out, oh, actually it's not going to work. So these are some of the considerations to look at. And how much do we know about this land that we're looking to develop? You have to do your investigations. And how much progress has been made towards identifying the occupants and their specific requirements. As we have already mentioned, you have to secure demand for a development. Sometimes developers actually sell their apartments off plan before they actually build it, just to secure the occupants. And also, how intrusive are the local authority and neighbors, etc. Because there are some locations that you cannot touch. The land is owned by certain organizations and you cannot touch those. So you have to do your investigations properly. All right? So we're going to look at an example quickly. This is an old example, just to identify what exactly do we incorporate into a feasibility. But we've already mentioned them, but I'll just open that document again. There we go. This is just an example. Can you see that? All right. So, like I said, your notes are important. First of all, you have your contents page. It has to be presentable, and that's your notes. The basis of this estimate. What have you based the feasibility on? Okay. It's an order of magnitude. You have your dates there. You've got the different schemes there, Block A, Block B, there's some mixed use, retail, and corporate offices, Block C. And so you just have to mention what information have you used that you have developed this feasibility based on, right? The capital expenditure costs for Block A, residential portion only has been omitted. So you have to give this kind of information out there, and from the total development capital expenditure, and included separately to determine the yield for that component. So that when someone is going through the detail and cost breakdown, they then have that information at hand. So we can see here that there is no architectural or structural designs available. So it was just the concept drawings that was used, and so the information was provided by the client. And also, so obviously it's an order of magnitude based on the rate per square meter. And then you've got your electrical reticulation also based on square meter rates. So these are just notes that you will write there to ensure that the person who's going to receive your feasibility will understand what information you use to compile it. It's important, obviously, to mention the location of where is the development. As we said, that the location is very important. And also, what is the specification? So this estimate has been based on drawings provided by the architect and specifications that are used. Like I mentioned, if you're going to use similar developments, you always have to allow for risk as well, because not everything is always exactly the same. And with time, prices do change and so forth. So you need to look at that. Some of the exclusions that haven't been incorporated are mentioned there. So we're just going to give it as an open office. We're not going to do any fit outs for the tenants. And all operational and cleaning equipments have been excluded. So you have to mention in detail so that we know that, okay, some equipment hasn't been provided for, so we need to make sure that it's part of contingency and future costs. All right, you look at some of the raising fees are excluded there, the VAT has also been excluded, all right? And so we look at the program that we said you have to plan in advance, so you have to know what's your pre-contract and what is your post-contract period that you've allowed for. This is very important in obviously determining your costs and your inflation impacts, your escalations. And so pre-contract has been allowed for 10 months. And remember, pre-contract is you need to get all your approvals from the council done in that time. So you have to make sure that you're not underestimating. Most of the time, I think the professional team assumes that it will take a month to get council approval, and then it takes a whole year. So even the zoning, if the place hasn't been zoned for the type of development that the developer is looking to do, it can come in there and actually take your pre-contract period into 2 years, because application for zoning can take time. And then you look at your contract period obviously as well. So you have to make sure you mention that information there, depending on how big your project is and the professional team you have on board, how skilled are they? It will determine how quickly you can get this project done. The type of contractor that you're going to appoint will have a huge impact on your contract period as well. And then you're going to look at your escalations. You've got your BER that issues you every quarterly, what is the current cost of construction, increases and so forth. And so you apply, you must mention the basis that you're using your escalation on and so forth. And then your VAT has been excluded from this particular example. And if there's any loss of interest, you know when it comes to money, you know your opportunity cost. So if you don't use this money elsewhere, this is the cost of that opportunity. And so the loss of interest there must be mentioned, and yeah. And also you can define some of the shops. These are just the notes that you write, and also some of the assumptions that you have made. You must mention those assumptions there. And I'm just gonna quickly go down now to the summary. We mentioned that one of the ways we look at is the yield, your return on your investment. And so how do you get it? This one, we've got two separate, we did a separate because there are different types. So you've got your residential sales there, block A, and then you've got your lease income. That's why they've got different returns, because they're based on your different expenditure, and so the income that you're getting is also different. That's why you've got a different yield. So like we mentioned about the variability of your feasibility, so how variable is it? Is it a mixed use development? So you may want to separate the incomes that you're generating from the different types of your developments to work out your return. So that's the summary of, is it feasible? Would you go for it if it's a 9.5% return? Would you go for it as a developer?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. Someone else? Is there anywhere else you can get more than 9.5% return on your money? Where can you get it? You're not sure where you can get a higher return? Because we may, okay, yes?
Just a quick question. Your net first year income for your residential portion,
Yes.
is that the sale of the whole block, or is that just a portion of the block?
Yes, I'm going to take you through that now. There is a detail. You're asking about your first year income of your residential, right?
Yeah.
So I'll go to the particular page there. That is page 9, where you see that the whole breakdown is there, but it's not so clear on the screen. Let's see. Can't even see the page numbers. My goodness, it's so bad. Let me try and make it bigger. Is that better? Yeah, I think it's better. Okay. So yeah, there we go. Yeah. So that is for your sales income. You've got the block A, different apartments. So you're working at rate per square meter. So you've got your studio apartments, 40 square meters. You've got 5 of them, and the total area is 200. So that is your average selling rate per square meter, and that's how you come out with the total income. And so you work it out. You get total units at the bottom there. Actually, I have a pointer. Let's see. Yes, total units 44. And you've got your total income there. So it's 69,218,000. And that's how you get to your total income profit.
So you were anticipating that you'd sell off all your units in the first year?
Yes, exactly. So this is an indication. You can make different assumptions, right? Just an example. Okay? Where was I? Yeah, here we go. So this is just a summary, okay? And then you go now to your breakdown now. You have to break down all your costs. Looking at your building works, we mentioned building works costs. You've got to allow for your different, you can even split it into your different locations. You've got your basements and your blocks, and you've got the rates, the square meters there. And these are just the costs that you need to allow for your lift installations and sprinkler systems, external works. So this is an order of magnitude. So you're working on rates per square meter. Like I said, we use your historical rates and information. Then you've got your pre-contract escalations, you've got your land costs, and so forth. I don't know if you can see. Can you see? It's so small. Yeah, it's very small. Okay, so this is just for the different buildings. And then you've got your income schedule, which we already discussed. That's just an example. So at the end, you get your return based on your capital expenditure after you deducted your net income profit. All right, so going back to our presentation. This is why I don't use a MacBook anymore. Can't find the things that you've opened. PowerPoint. There you go. Okay, can you see? Okay, wait, I've got it, I think. There we go. Alrighty. Now, of course, we need to make sure that we optimize the feasibility study. We have to do that cost estimate, appropriate, yes, where you've got your research and your accurate information, and of course try to use it as up-to-date as possible, and consider the need for maybe a premium or a discount, depending on who you are, if you're the professional or the client. Okay, look at the site, look at the program, the consultants that you're going to work with. It's very important. They are experienced at what they're doing, and of course, economic as well. But we know the more experienced, the more expensive, right? And the tenants that are going to be working on your development, staying in your development, is there a demand for that? All right? And of course, the brief that you've got, is it a realistic brief? Can it really be done? Okay? And then when it comes to your tenant installation and some of the costs that you need to allow for, you need to look at that in order to make your feasibility as effective as possible. You're trying to optimize your feasibility. So you have to check for the requirements in detail of your tenants. What are the tenant requirements for this development? And who's responsible for what? That's why it's important to have your tenant agreements as well, to agree with them, so that they can agree what they're paying for and what you are paying for as a developer. And also, what is the strategy? Is it a cost or a revenue strategy? And some of the various other matters that you need to look at as well. You must account for your letting commission, you know, as a capital cost. And your development profit, look at that. Is it really something that is accounted for according to the character of your developer? Like I said, different developers have different briefs and, you know, are driven basically by different things. It may not necessarily just be for profit. It may just be for socio-economic factors as well. All right? And yes, the VAT, transfer duty, you need to know the difference and the relationship between them. And do not confuse your transfer duty and your transfer costs for the land, and if there's an existing building there. And also in your finance charges of the land, the property, you need to know when the land is paid for. Is it land that is being leased to you? Because nowadays I see the city of Johannesburg, what they're doing a lot of leases of their land for the developers to come and develop. So it's not a sale of land, so you need to understand the difference and how to approach that kind of feasibility. Yes?
On the previous point, it says don't confuse transfer duty and transfer costs. What's the difference between?
Yes, so your transfer duty is a duty you have to pay every time you transfer a property. It's just there. Your transfer costs can include your lawyer's transfer costs. So you need to appoint a legal team to. Only a legal person really most of the time carries out this work. Transfer duty is a governmented imposed transfer on the size of the amount of the transfer. So it's a percentage on the transfer. Your costs involve all the legal costs for the transfer of that item. Yeah. Okay. All right. right, how to further optimize your feasibility study? You obviously have to do proper research and the detail of the land-related costs that we mentioned. The zoning can take a long time, so make sure that you've done proper research on the current zoning, and if you need to rezone that land, how much it's going to cost you and how long it's going to take you. Okay? Look at your bulk services values and manage them. How high can the building go up? What's the bulk factor that can be accommodated in that kind of development? There are restrictions of different heights that you can actually build. So look at that. What are the current rentals in that area? You need to do your research to see what kind of rents you can accumulate there, and how are you going to escalate. Nowadays, a lot of people who are renting will tell you, you know, it's tough times. And if you've got a tenant and they're paying you rent, would you consider keeping that tenant for a lower escalation of their rental every year? You have to consider those things, otherwise you will not have a tenant in your development. And also, obviously, we've looked at the summary page of all the information you need, and any fine-tuning of the variables. How's your cash flow going to be is, you know, as your development is in operation, you need to account for those kind of things, and the payment of the land, and when you add the value onto the land, you're enhancing it. And sometimes, can you get really a professional team that can work at risk on this project? Some professionals are doing it these days because they are desperate for work. It's not an ideal environment. However, it is happening, and so you can look into those aspects as well.
What do you mean, like working at risk?
Working at risk, you get a quantity surveyor, you ask them to look at an estimate for you, and they are working at risk because it's not yet approved that this project will proceed, so they are not actually getting paid. Working at risk is actually you're not getting paid as yet. And perhaps if the project goes, then you get paid. It's a risk work. Yes, it's a risk. Yes. Okay? And how do you further look at optimizing your feasibility? Obviously, from a developer's perspective, they would be happy to work with a professional team who is not asking to be paid before the project is started. But obviously, for the professional side, you want to get paid, right, for the work that you do. So it depends on which side of the fence you are standing. All right? And are we shooting from the hip when we do feasibility studies? Shooting from the hip? No, we're not. We're not just doing guesstimates. It's not guessing the costs. You actually have to get the historical values or get a quotation, an actual cost. All right? You don't guess the program, you evaluate the amount of work that needs to be done, then you look at the amount of time required to do that work, okay? If you're using templates, check the assumptions in those templates that we discussed earlier, the assumptions that were done, and make the template applicable to the development that you want to do, because things change with time. Things won't stay the same, all right? Integrating scale and let schemes, sale. So some of the portion of the development maybe is for sale, and some of the portion is for rental. So you have to integrate the two. Like I showed you at the top, there were two types of residential and other developments, so they yield different returns. So you want to see the difference in the returns. And you must also, are you going to sell or are you going to hold? Or do you have a lease? Again, like I mentioned, some have leases now. These government organizations, when they do a development, they give you a lease, some 50 years, some 99 years, and you get your return. You must give back the land once you've got your return, so forth. Okay? Some of the exclusions, perhaps, or inclusions, you have to decide. Some donations, some art, some associations, some security, and so forth. And yeah, so we have it. Thank you very much. That is the end.
Considering like a lease, right, why would it be advisable, or why would a developer opt to use the land that is being leased to them? Because at the end of the day, it feels like you're developing somebody else's property, and once you're done, you leave with nothing.
Yes.
It feels like that.
I know.
Yeah.
I think because of the regulations around the land, even with the government, they are finding it in terms of the red tape that's involved in transferring the ownership of the land. They'd rather lease it for that time. So as a developer, you have to look at that and say, do you see an opportunity here or not? Can you develop it and make your money back and exit? Or can you extend the lease? Some have an option of an automatic renewal as well. And so it depends on the agreement. So it is still beneficial as a developer to look into that. Yeah. Okay?
Sorry, I'm a numbers guy. In your worked example, what informed the decision to, or the prediction that you'd sell off the whole residential portion in 1 year?
I mean, if you can make the money in that time, why not? Or you want to keep it, it's up to you, really.
No, what I'm
This
asking.
is just an example, remember.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't have to always be the case.
Okay.
Yes. That's what, I'm giving this as an
It
example.
will also be a brief from your client. You know, why is the developer deciding to develop? He may want to develop and make his money and exit the investment, or he wants to get steady cash flow. If he wants to get steady cash flow, obviously it's the option of looking at, looking for tenants for the tenant. So it's really, like he said, what is the objective? What do you want to do? So it depends on how the developer approaches his development and what his objective is primarily.
Yes.
And obviously you advise them based on the market, right? Because you
Yes.
can't just agree
Yes.
to settle
Yes.
that
I mean,
much.
for me, I would love to have the cash flow forever. For me, I would love that.
Yeah, so for instance, as QSs, they generally would get a brief from the client. What does the client want? So based on that brief, they'll have to come up with the best option. What is the best option based on this brief? But they have the responsibility to advise the client
Yeah.
that we don't think it's the best option to sell. We rather believe you can get better, cash flow if you keep the building, and this is how it will pay itself back. So that they have that responsibility, but the decision rests with the developer and what the developer wants.
Yes. Thank you.
And also with the feasibility studies, I'm curious as to the detail, when you're calculating the cost, let's take this building, right? Looking at maybe little things like the cost of this, I don't know, everything. So how deep do you go into it? The cost of that thing on the door, the cost of the wire, or is it more of it's just the cost of setting up the building and the necessities and
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah.
That's an important question because you have to know how detailed do you have to go, right? And like I said, time and quality. So the less time you spend on something, the less quality you will produce. And we have ACOM that publishes your building costs as well. So you can look at the ACOM book. They actually give you rate per square meter that you can. Yes, there's the booklet. So depending on the type of development that you're doing, they've got the rates per square meter for that type of development. And that rate will be inclusive, basically, of your small items that you're mentioning. However, if you do want to go into further detail, depending on the design development stage, the plans that you have from the architect, because sometimes you're only working with a sketch, and the client hasn't yet defined their brief to the detail of what type of glass actually or window does they actually want.
Because the cost varies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you do just take an average rate per square meter based on the quality or standard that he's looking for in that book. It showed different standards, low, medium, high, whatever. And then if you want to break it down, then obviously you need further details from the client to give you the specifications of floor finishes, what is it going to be, vinyl flooring or porcelain tiling, then you can get more detail. Yeah. But then you don't want to spend a lot of time in the details doing a feasibility if you haven't yet decided whether or not you're going to proceed with the project. That's then another thing. Yeah.
And can somebody that's not a QS perform as thorough as proper feasibility studies, someone that's in background in construction and details?
Well, I believe anyone really can apply themselves. If they can apply their minds. Yes, if they're a property professional, they have a background and understanding of what is a building cost, incorporating. If you look at your preliminaries, if they understand what is preliminaries, then definitely yes.
Yeah, and you have a lot of developers from a financing background or any other different background, and they've done this sort of development successfully over the years, and it's generally experience and your passion. You know, if you're passionate about it and curious and you want to know and you're open to learning, I think it's doable. I just wanted to emphasize her point on your question. Page 49 covers what you're asking on, the square meter method, the elemental method, the detailed breakdown method. So you could read through that, and it will give you the different types of methods just to cost it.
Sorry, is the square meter method the same as the order of magnitude? Or is that something?
Yes. Order of magnitude is rate per square meter, correct? Yes.
In terms of these developments development projects that the city is issuing, do you develop and then maybe you own the building itself, but then lease the land? How is that structured? How do you then pay the
actually, I've got another example. I'll show you now. We did when I did this property development program, you can decide to hold the development for 10 years and sell it after 10 years after you made your return, and it goes back automatically. The land will always be owned by the city. So the way they structure their tenders, they say, okay, we give you 50 years to lease this, to develop this land, but we're leasing the land to you. And so you do your development there, and after 50 years, it's either they will change you don't know what the city will do depending on the government, right? The policies and the regulations. They may agree, okay, we will renew it, but according to the tender documents, you give a proposal to the city. How can you best develop this piece of land, right? You make your profit, but they need you to develop because they need financing from the private sector to develop that particular land. So you pay the city a fee. They do charge a fee for leasing the land to you. You include that fee into your development costs. You understand? You still understand? They lease the land to you.
Yeah.
So you develop that land. Let's say you've got 50 years.
Yeah.
You can sell it if you want after 10 years. But even to the new person, you're not selling it's still in a lease form. You're selling the development, the person who's buying is paying for the returns they're going to be getting from the rentals and so forth. Then they have to cover the operational costs. Then they will make whatever profit that they're making. But at the end of the 50 years, it needs to go back to the city.
So now, because you find it as a piece of, in many instances, you find it as it's land, and then it has a building with it.
Yes, when there's a building also, with the proposal that they had actually released, they closed in July, they did have some buildings. What they did, they zoned them for the developer. So they said, we would like to do a residential here, we would like to do student accommodation there, we would like to do mixed use here. So it's already zoned for the developer. And so the developer then has the understanding of what needs to be done in that particular space, but the developer will still come up with a design. Whether they're going to refurbish the particular existing structures, or obviously it's difficult to then have separate structures because you've got different houses there. So what you want to do is demolish and then start again with like the whole area clear. So the design is all your responsibility. You raise the finance to develop that from your investors. So you basically appoint the professional team, you do all of that, the construction of it and everything. Yes.
So with the whole lease thing, but if maybe we don't get renewal, right? So and it gets back to the hands of the government, do they still use it for that purpose and continue with just
I'm sure it would be beneficial for them to do so because it's already developed for that purpose. Unless they want to change, it would then depend on
cost them more
yes,
to
cost them to
redevelop
yes.
into something different.
Yes.
I mean, if they have the money, and why not? But it makes sense to continue getting cash
So
flow.
I want to open that Excel quickly just to show
Yeah,
you
I
another
see.
example we did here. This is more recent that we did.
Is it on the?
I had opened it. Yeah, there, okay. Yes, so of course, again, the assumptions that we made, I'll just take you through. Oh, what happened now? It just disappeared. Oh, the stick, oh, no, let me just, oh yeah, there we go. Okay. I'm trying to make it bigger, but no, it's fine. Okay, it's so tiny. All right. So this one is actually out on tender for real now, but we did it as a project. But the city of Cape Town has now released it out to tender. It is in Cape Town there by Granger Bay, next to the Greenpoint Stadium there. There's a piece of land, 7,175 square meters of land. So obviously we had our basis of our estimate. So the estimate is based on your estimated building rates from June and so forth. We also use that ACOM book for some of the rates and market rates in Cape Town that we also got from, online. You do get Windy, other online systems that actually capture, if you're subscribed, like your BER indices is a subscription service you have to pay for, which will give you kind of like the current market analysis of the area that you're looking to develop. So we had to use some of those subscriptions to get the demand in the location, what kind of developments are in demand. So our brief was we must do a mixed-use development. But then we had to come up with what exactly are we going to develop? Is it going to be your residential together with your some of your retail as well? But we also had to incorporate some inclusionary affordable housing, because that is becoming quite an issue with young professionals who can't afford to stay where they work, close to where they work. So we had to allow for that as well. And so we listed our assumptions there. Based on the developer's experience and financial standing, we have assumed a lower interest rate, which was at 9.25. And then we have a higher raising fee, and then with a 10-year term, structured at 80% residual at the end of the project. So you make your own allowances based on your experience, based on your preferences as a developer, but this is just kind of the assumptions we make. So I'll take you through, for example, I want to show you how we calculated. So your capital expenditure, it's not showing everything on this page. So obviously, we've discussed all of these. Your building costs, so we also use the order of magnitude rate per square meters there. Okay, then you've got your structure cost, your lifts, all these external works, preliminaries, then you've got your development cost, you have to incorporate your legal fees, finance costs. But I want to show you how we did an income schedule just for 10 years. So small. So we worked on 10 years, and we knew by 10 years we would have the return that we wanted. We came up with about 14% return, but this is now obviously your income after your 10 years. So that's 10 years there, looking at the different retail space and residential rental income that we would have been collecting over the 10 years. And when we work it backwards, to your return, we came up with your IRR of 14%. Obviously, again, if you look at your, Jesus is so small. Okay. So our projected total cost for that development was 407 million after 407 million years after we incorporated everything. But then our return on investment there now, oh my word, I can't wait. How do you make this bigger? Jeez. Really tiny. 9.5% was our projected yield. So we worked on an income, total net income of about 8 million, obviously, after you deduct all your operational costs. So we also worked on when you look at the current market rental costs, rentals, to come up with and we applied a 7% kind of escalation. That's 7%, you can't see it, but that's now escalation for the tenants on a yearly basis. So we held it for 10 years, and after 10 years, we sell. And that's the income, and then the sales, some sales, and then obviously your loan, you must work it out. And the land value, there's a way that you also work it out based on the residual. So once you work out your total, for some places you don't know how to value the land. You can't say market rates and so forth. So you take your total development cost and you deduct everything, and then the balance you have there is then the land cost, your residual. Yes. Yes.
With regards to leased land, what is the frequency of the payment? Is it a once-off payment, or does it depend on the agreement?
Yes. So what the city has is a percentage of the development cost is a once-off that you will incorporate it obviously as part of your development costs. So let's say your development is 400 million, they will maybe charge a 1% lease fee on that.
And it's once off?
Yes, once off.
So you
must allow for that. It depends, like again, maybe they want, 400 million, it's a lot of money for a developer to pay 1% of that.
Yeah, but if you take maybe like the Discovery building, which costs about 2-3 billion, and then 1% of that small space of land, is that really the value of the land?
You see, when you look at Discovery building, you developers there is a growth point. They are a private sector developer. And Discovery is not interested in owning buildings. Their business is not property. They answered this question before. Someone asked them, how can you pay so much money rent to a developer? They said, that's not our business to develop property. We just want something that's already built for us, and they take care of the development of that. So if you've got a private, let's say a private client, perhaps they don't want to lease the land, they will sell it to you. And so you don't have to deal with the lease agreements. The complications usually are, public land, public owned land.
Okay, so public owned land is different to private. Okay, because I was going to ask, like with waterfall, where you have PwC and all that stuff.
Yes.
The frequency of their payments, is it also a percentage? How do they calculate?
Yeah, we also actually had a presentation from someone from Waterfall. They have a different kind of agreement. It's a 99-year lease. Yeah, but he didn't go into the details. Obviously, some of this is a confidential information. Yeah.
But I think, just to sum it up, I think it's all dependent on different individuals. They do their own calculation, they look at what is best for them, and they will structure these deals based on what makes sense to them and what is best for their situation at any particular point in time. So you as a tenant or whatever, you then need to make that call. Does it make sense for me to pay this much this way? It's all give and take. If I own the land, I've got capital to develop. I develop and I structure it how I structure it, and whoever wants it will come for it. You can structure anything anyhow you want, as long as there's demand for it and it makes sense and it's priced right. There will be takers for it.
Okay, so there's no standard processes in terms of how you agree on this land. It's just dependent on whoever owns the land, basically. Is that what you said?
If you're asking in terms of is it a once-off or a continuous thing,
Yes.
you have to agree obviously on the fee that you're going to be applying, right? And what is the fee going to be? The fee is based on what? Is it the fee on the development cost once off, or then you maybe look at the fee on your rental income? Then that is not going to be a once-off fee. So you have to agree, yes, once again, yeah. All right. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tryfina.
You're welcome.